5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. Welcome to Cabaret Radio.
Hey,
With me, as always, is everyone's favorite dog, the good boy. Hi, good boy. Hi, good boy.
what's going on, Dave? What are you doing?
Not too much. It's rainy in LA. It's a chilly, rainy LA night. So I've got my Bell's Christmas Ale with me. Sorry, I didn't want to do product placement, but Bell's, like my favorite brewery from Michigan, and I'm drinking their Christmas Ale. It's December, so I'm kind of getting in the spirit of Jolly Saint Jolly, you know?
It's Jolly Saint, which we're all familiar with. I think it'd be great if we just did shameless product placement for our things that we just love. Now, this is not product placement, but I think Bell's is crisp and it's delicious, and I honestly think there's no other beer you should select when trying to refresh yourself.
Somehow they found this and just sent us a bunch of Bells. That would be like my dream come true. So
we can only hope. Let's keep pushing it.
It's the season of miracles. So
say again.
The season of miracles, I say.
Yeah, this is the time of year where miracles happen. The supernatural is actually going to manifest itself during the colder months, from what I was taught as a child.
Right.
And speaking of the colder months, it dropped below freezing this morning.
Oof.
Quite noticeably. It was 30 degrees when I got up for work this morning, and I don't know what Christmas time in LA feels like. But how was the weather out there, Dan?
It was in the 50s today. It's probably about 49, 48 maybe. But when it, like today was chilly, like notably chilly. Rain coming down. So it's wet and chilly, but it felt great. Last year was really miserable because there was all these fires in December. So it was very bizarre when you'd be like watching whatever, A Christmas Carol, and then it's like 85 degrees and it's all smoggy. It's a horrible feeling. But this year it feels a lot more Christmassy, so I'll take it.
Great. Yeah. I'll take it too. I'm kind of enjoying the fact that it's actually cold as we walk our way towards the holiday season. Yeah. So it feels appropriate.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the news. Paris is on fire.
It's insane. Very interesting stuff going on. Paris to me is like the number one thing. I think a lot of people don't understand how major this is. In which the more I kind of delve, the more it's like, I think this is the start of a kind of a new paradigm. This is, we're going to see a lot more like this. It's not just going to be Paris. Anyone who's familiar with like Brexit, to the US 2016 elections, to the stuff that's gone on across Europe knows that like there's some weird fabric to all of it, that ultimately this is just the end of something and the beginning of something else. And the Paris protests, riots, I would say, is the latest iteration of this. And it really looks like it's just getting started. I was just listening to a guy recently who was talking about how if you think that Macron reversing on the gas taxes means that this is going to come to an end,
I'm sorry, Dan, who reversed the gas tax?
Macron?
I'm sorry, you're coming in a little hazy. One more time if you...
The prime minister or president, I forget which. Is it President Macron?
No, well, yes.
It's some sort of...
It is President Macron.
Macron.
Excuse me, Macron.
Macron. Yeah, that's my French. No, I have no French heritage, which I wish I did because I have a great affinity for French culture.
Are you a Francophile?
You could say I'm a Francophile. Yeah.
I became a Francophile in college
Hmm.
because I went to college in a very rural area of the United States, and I ended up just feeling like it just lacked culture. It's very elitist of me to say, but like coming
Yeah.
from New York, I was like, man, I just want to be around like people that have never killed an animal with their own two hands, and that's few and far between where I was going to
Yeah.
school. And I came across a movie at the time. This might be dating myself here, but Emily, and that was such a wonderful French movie and all that stuff. So I got into French culture a bit at that time. However, France right now is a far cry away from
It's
the wonderful, colorful world of Amelie at the moment. It
it's
is.
not as whimsical as all that these days. Very
They
hilarious.
should edit the video of that guy getting beat up by French security forces inside that Burger King with that French music from Amelie in the background. That'd be brilliant.
Well, that's the funny thing about France that I find so fascinating is that it is this mix where it's this whimsy and people are like, haha, surrender, blah blah blah. But they are fighters, man. They can be vicious. They have a history of rebellion, of upending their leadership. We're seeing that again right now, where the Brits, who maybe have more of a reputation for being tough, but I mean they're just rolling over. They tried and it doesn't look to be working out with Brexit and their problems with the EU. France, man, they're really intense, and from what I understand, the last I heard, it's actually a lot worse than people in the U.S. are aware. That's just what I was told by, or not told personally, but that's what I heard from a European fella. Said that the U.S. media is actually really downplaying it. So we shall see, but it's looking
Yeah, I mean,
crazy.
I haven't. I feel as though the French situation, right, what's happening in Paris, should be in the headlines constantly. Like it should be the leading story. It's as though I don't know what other major event or major uprising. It's remember the Arab Spring.
Yep.
That was in the headlines appropriately, and I feel as though because it's a Western country and stuff like that, we shouldn't be concerned. But now I'm not equivalent it with like a coup or anything. That's not the point. But I think if you see a coup of a government that's teetering on whether or not it can control its people in the Middle East, you go, well, it's an unstable region from decades of war, blah, blah, blah. But I think that the setting and the location is even more important because it is a Western country. This is Paris. This is a metropolitan city. Tons of people from all around the world going through there constantly. And right under the Arc de Triomphe, you have thousands and thousands of protesters that are defacing monuments and burning cars and just really like tearing the city down in many ways. They're setting galleries on fire.
Mm-hmm.
It is such an important moment in history. I really think it has been what would you say undercut in the news cycle. It's like no, we should be paying attention here, close attention.
Yes. So I wholly agree, and I will ask you a question that is a bit provocative, I would say. So hope you're ready. So how empathetic do you feel towards these protesters, cum rioters?
Well, I think this is what happens when a government doesn't listen to its people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you do that enough times over and over again, and this is bound to happen. These people have had stagnated wages, similar to what we see in the United States, and they couldn't afford another tax hike.
Mm-hmm.
And the government's going to play games. I mean, that's not a free market move, you know. And I think these people are reacting, saying like, "Hey, we can't afford that." You know, look what happened with a situation like that anywhere else in the world, and I think you get a similar reaction. I think this is just, more importantly, because of where it's taking place, I think we see it as something that really stands out because it is such a stable Western, you know, G5 kind of a nation. And who can blame them? I really think the chickens have come home to roost in France in a lot of ways. I really think there are social, political, instability for whatever degree you want to kind of gauge that for a Western nation has led them to this point. And I think a lot of people were looking for something to kind of push back on, and this one seemed to be something that has united a lot of people, left and right, which is something, you know, worth talking about.
For sure. And I find myself in a bit of a pickle, and I think you're probably similar, where I do find myself empathizing quite a bit with these rioters and protesters. However, it's hard for me to square the fact that I think we've both been pretty critical of Antifa, and they utilize very similar tactics and very, destructive and even violent tactics. So how do you find that difficult to square in your head, that difference?
Yeah, Dan, absolutely. I think anytime you start destroying property, you can make the same point. You really can. You know, I always think of that picture of, you know, the march led by, you know, Martin Luther King, and just, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of people stretching all the way down to the Washington Monument. And that, it always resonated with me as like, what a moment where people came together. I mean, people are saying the same thing. They're saying, wow, what a moment where people are coming together. But they're also real quickly driving away anyone who's been sitting on the fence because of how, I mean, destructive it is, and almost self-destructive. There was a great tweet by Eric Weinstein where he basically said what he had observed, or what he's observing in France, where it's like the destruction of national monuments and burning of galleries and national treasures, so to speak. You know, things that, I mean, we talked about how we have an affinity for French culture, and like, you know, to destroy that out of, you know, for whatever deep reasons that they have, Peterson.
Hello?
Lose so much of what you had built up over, you know, centuries. And I feel, and what Eric had pointed out was, it's almost akin to a teenager who cuts themselves. It's like this self-destructive behavior where you have this deep-seated hatred for who you are in the process of trying to feel better. And I think that is, you know, clearly something that needs to be eradicated. You have to get rid of that element. But you know what? I don't think that they stand up to protest without feeling that way to begin with. So who knows? Maybe this is part and parcel of a protest in France in its social political state. Maybe if it was, you know, people linked arms like they did in the 50s and 60s, you know, this mass peaceful protest where people are, you know, wearing their Sunday best and trying to just show support through sheer numbers. You know, maybe it doesn't happen like that nowadays. You know, maybe things are just a little too chaotic for it to be that clean anymore. And I don't know. But I'll tell you what, I think a lot of people are in agreement with how these people feel strictly from a political point of view, but their tactics, their way of drawing attention to themselves it's probably more counterproductive. And I think Antifa has a lot to, is a great case study on that. I really don't think Antifa has drawn more people to the movement, as opposed to, identifying maybe there's a lot of people that are leaving or refuse to show up to protest because of Antifa. And I think maybe the yellow vest may have that same sort of situation.
Yeah, I think for me, it just seems that Antifa makes a less compelling and a less coherent case, I find, than these guys seem to make. It just seems clearer to me, where Antifa just feels more spiteful and vague and just more childish. Regardless, I mean, I think it's absolutely horrifying if works of art are being destroyed, and I know that they are, and I have a lot, I think that's a horrible thing. But I don't, I can see very clearly how the cause and effect, the impact that these taxes that keep being levied on people are causing. The fact that, I can only imagine and what it must be like for people who live in rural areas and have to drive into the city, and they're paying an arm and a leg for gasoline like that. Even on US prices, that takes a lot out of you. Being in California, that it's no joke. I mean, gas prices are pretty expensive. It's significant, and it's at least twice what we pay in France. So if you're just barely making ends meet, that's a big problem. And it is a problem that is mostly going to be on the backs of rural workers and blue collar workers in general, low wage workers. The people who are, the higher elites, they live in the cities, they probably don't have that long of commutes. They probably have electric vehicles anyway that they can drive. So it's like, it just feels patently unfair. So yeah, I don't know. I saw, there's a memes going around of Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake," and Macron saying, "Let them drive electric cars." So that's where people are coming from right now. And I feel like that resonates.
Well, I feel like if you were to, it's interesting, the electric car thing, because, if you're more conservative, economically conservative, fiscal conservative, you say, let the market decide. There shouldn't be laws that force people or incentivize people to move away from the option of their choice. We shouldn't, protectionism of certain industries, like you're against that sort of thing. Yet, if you said, if you frame it like Macron is, concerned about the environment and we should move away from gasoline fueled vehicles, and that's something that we have to do right now. The alarmist in terms of global warming would say that the time is even past. Like, we have to do everything we can now, and even then it may be too late. So, I wonder where the environmentalists on the left are in France when something like this happens. It's like, well, you should have made better choices, or we can't afford to drive, gasoline fed cars anymore. Like, we have to switch over to electric. I don't know. I really think there's a lot of people on the left that sympathize with this movement. And I think they do so out of the thrill of seeing them destroy Western iconography. I mean, honestly, that's where I think they're getting more of their thrills, because what I see is something more like, protectionism. It's the same way when I see, Trump go to a steel mill and be like, we're going to get this place running again because we're going to hike tariffs up and all that. And it's like, I really don't think that that's the best way of going about things. And more importantly, when that guy is cheering, you go, hey, steelworker guy number 4, weren't you the guy that speaks about how much you're afraid of like a centralized, economically planned, government and all that. Like, where are you when Trump is talking tariffs? Well, you're on board with it. Why? Because you get to have your blue collar job back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing I can kind of identify with the left in France right now, which is like, well, where are you when you go? The government needs to do everything it can to protect the environment, and greedy corporations are destroying the planet, yada yada yada. Like, wouldn't you want to like at least hurt the the fuel industry and the oil industry and the auto industry? Wouldn't you want that to be enacted by your government, which essentially is what Macron was pushing for, like a higher fuel tax? Like, hey, we're just going to hike taxes on fuel. Maybe you'll figure out a better way to get to work. And all of a sudden, you have them, in the streets with, right-leaning protesters fighting as well. And I think a main reason why they find themselves in the street is because they kind of want to, destroy some stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big difference between what we see in France and what we see in like Seattle, for instance, or Portland with Antifa, is that the thing that scares me about Antifa is there's an inherently racial, component to it, which means it's not that I think there's a certain group of people who can be isolated demographic wise in Antifa. I just think that the idea of racial politics and group identity is so important to Antifa that it becomes a more dangerous mob, because you can identify, quote unquote, the others rather quickly, whereas this seems to be more economically driven.
Well, can you clarify that a little bit more?
Sure. So when I see Antifa, stopping traffic going like, you're a little whitey, ain't you? And that psycho, right? Yeah. I think a lot of people identify with that as like, yeah, we're fighting against the man, which means white men. So you see a white person and they are to be considered suspicious, right? Whereas in France right now, it's anyone can join in on this one, because we're looking at, it's essentially more of like in a very French way, a kind of pushback against elitism, like you had mentioned.
Well, right? Meanwhile, Antifa is almost exclusively upper class white people. And whereas this is legitimately a lot of blue collar people. And I assume they're majority white, because France is certainly majority white, majority French. But I do think they're a little more sincere in their needs and their points. So, yeah.
So if you're in France right now and you're walking down the street, I don't have to worry about someone saying, hey, there's a white person, because we're on one side of things, i.e., standing up for people who have been systematically oppressed in our country, and you look like a person who does the systematic oppression.
Right.
I don't have to worry about that in France. It's more like, are you an elitist? Now, if I'm in France and I'm driving around in a limo, I should be concerned. You know what I mean? But I really don't think that that's the case in terms of the racial component that we see with Antifa here is not really transferred over there, which is why I think Antifa in the United States is probably much more of a dangerous sort of organization, is because they can identify, quote unquote, the other or the enemy by looking at someone's melatonin count and are you a man or a woman, and we can start going down the list and saying, do you fit into this group? And if you don't, you better prove that you're a true believer, or else we got a pipe or a bike lock they'll teach you to stand up against us. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, with all this Paris stuff and these riots and the fight of nationalism versus globalism, everything else seems very small and minuscule by comparison, I find. But let's talk about other stuff anyway, because it is still interesting. for example, there was an issue that I think you know a little bit more about it than I do, at Columbia University. Is that right? With
That's correct.
yeah, a Saturday Night Live writer. Did you want to
right.
give a little info on that and what's going on?
Sure, absolutely. So, a former writer for SNL, the thing that stands out about him, as per the situation, is that he was the first Asian American writer for SNL. I believe he is Indian in heritage and ethnicity. So he had been invited to perform for the organization is called AAA, or the Asian American Alliance at Columbia University, where they have a show called, get ready for this, Culture Shock. And it's organized every year by this organization at Columbia, and it promotes, quote, political, social, and personal empowerment of Asian Americans, as well as other marginalized groups, end quote. And he got up and he told a bunch of jokes, and a lot of those jokes dealt with race and sexual orientation. And about 30 minutes into his set, he was told to wrap it up, and then basically asked to leave the stage. They booted him. I think the joke in question that a lot of people are referencing was, yeah. So
this joke is so milquetoast. It's like it's nothing.
Yeah. Have you heard the joke yet?
Oh yeah, I'm reading it just now. So it's
Right.
During the event, Pattel's performance featured commentary on his experience living in a diverse area of New York City, including a joke about a gay black man in his neighborhood, which officials deemed inappropriate. Patel joked that being gay cannot be a choice because, quote, no one looks in the mirror and thinks, this black thing is too easy. Let me just add another thing to it. Honestly, I've heard variations of that joke numerous times. Nothing to take away from Patel. It's a perfectly valid joke. And it's
a good joke. It's a good joke.
It's a fine joke.
It adds up, and all the math works on that one. And as a matter of fact, I would say it's even a joke that identifies the validity of certain elements of intersectional oppression. So
that it's a woke joke.
It's a woke joke, in my opinion. But what the hell do I know?
It's clearly right. The whole point of it is acknowledging the challenges of marginalized communities. So it's just like that's just crazy. But I don't know. And I honestly am not. I don't have the time or energy or patience or interest anymore in pretending that these people have a point or anything along with it. It's just stupid. They're obnoxious. They're stupid. They're not right. They're wrong. They're in the wrong in every case. They're in the wrong now. So it's just, I don't know. I don't know what to say. This is just silly.
Well, I thought it was interesting hearing many people who were from the show who were not in the least bit, afraid to say what they saw happened. Mm-hmm. And what I found to be interesting was some people are pushing the narrative that it is how we think it is, right? A bunch of quote unquote snowflakes got, their feathers ruffled because a comic was telling jokes that had the word black in it and gay in it. And people lost their minds, right? Oh my goodness, can't deal with this. Other sort of.
One real quick, the show's called Culture Shock.
I know, that's so funny.
The word
how do you
the title?
It's like, well, I thought the quote that really stuck out to me was, okay, here it was. Patel's remarks ran counter to the inclusive spirit and integrity of culture shock, and as such was made a choice made to invite him to leave.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that discomfort and safety can coexist. However, the discomfort that Patel caused was unproductive in this space. We ourselves are still processing the events of culture shock and maintain different perspectives on it, even within our organization. We invite and welcome dialogue concerning his remarks and our actions. But what really made me laugh was the idea that it was just saying that this runs counter, that his remarks do not align with the mission and message of AAA and culture shock. It's like, well, if you have a show called Culture Shock, I think it actually is precisely what it's almost advertising. It's like, you ready to hear some crazy stuff? Like, we'll talk, people are afraid to talk about being gay and being black and people that they know who are, experiencing marginalization and racism, but we'll go there. And it's like the first time someone has the audacity to go there, they're like, hey, you do me a favor. You're making everyone very uncomfortable. So why don't you stop doing that? It's like saying, I'm going to the NRA's meeting, and they have a sign that says just for our safety, we ask you to not bring any weapons into the building.
Yeah.
It's so ironic to me. But I thought it was interesting that other people had said that it wasn't the fact that, as one story had mentioned it, I had said, it was like a bunch of snowflakes, losing their minds, as much as, well, he was doing this set. The first jokes, didn't really go over well. And then he kept pushing, doubling down, and the crowd really withdrew. So they decided that it was time to wrap it up and get him off stage. And then he started talking about, you're going to have to get into the real world one day and blah, blah, blah. I basically kind of chastising them for being, sensitive kids, when they thought that was inappropriate, because it wasn't the fact that they felt that they were being overly sensitive as much as he wasn't being funny. But I also remind you, this is a former SNL writer, so he has to have some sort of comedic talent. Maybe not. Maybe this is an example of SNL wishing to be diverse by any stretch of it, and just hiring someone who looks differently than a white man. Yeah. But I highly doubt that. I highly, highly doubt that. By all accounts, this guy told a good joke. I think that SNL is spoiled for choice in terms of writers that want to write for the show. It's a grade A, top of the line, cable network writing. It's all the boxes. It's the Super Bowl if you're a writer to write for SNL. So I highly doubt that he just wasn't funny. I think these kids are a little sensitive. That's what I think.
Yeah, I submitted packets to Saturday Night Live. I didn't get in, and I'm pretty funny. So one hopes that he's quite funny, but
let's be honest, Dan, the only reason you didn't get on that show is because you look like every other sad dude at a bus stop in Portland. Okay.
That's true. I've been to a bus stop in Portland, and I was in very high spirits. But it was
I felt oddly in sync with the world at that point in time.
It was Portland's one sunny day that year, so that was different. But the thing is, so it's an interesting issue that I was thinking of, and you kind of changed my framing of it, because there needs to be some sort of hierarchy. Like, if you have Columbia University students and this Patel character, Nimesh Patel, the hierarchy should say Patel up here, students way down here, administrators maybe a little bit higher than students, but they shouldn't be telling him when it's too far over the line, a big problem. They should really be taking a step back, because he assumedly has something to teach them, because he's the one in a position of power, of hierarchical power. He's achieved, he's done the work, he knows what he's talking about. He should be listened to in this case, Now,
well, because it's a hierarchy based off of competence.
It's a hierarchy based off of competence. You can assume that if he's writing for Saturday Night Live. I mean, some of the best comedy writers of all time have come through Saturday Night Live. It's one of the most elite places to be a comedy writer. You have to assume that if you're writing for Saturday Night Live, I know people who've written for Saturday Night Live. Across the board, they're all very, very talented people. I have no reason to assume Nimesh Patel is any different. So
correct. I'm right there with you.
If you brought him to your school to have an event and you attended that event, assumedly you want to hear what he thinks is funny. You know, like, you don't tell him that he's wrong. If you think he's wrong, you don't have to laugh, but at least let him do his set, for heaven's sakes. Like,
right, let him do the set.
I don't. It's not. They're wrong. They're wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also heard this other way of thinking about it, which is it's not incumbent on Patel to change his set because he was invited there. They're asking him, like you had mentioned, to bring his gifts to the fore and say, what do you have to offer this audience, because you are arguably a competent comedy writer and a comic in general. It's up to the people who invite him to perform to say, is this the kind of performer we want on our show? And clearly the most important thing to them wasn't necessarily his material. It was the fact that he fit the demographic that they were looking for. He was an Asian American. So
right. I mean,
I think this is where you get into trouble, right? Because they judge this guy based off of how he looked more likely than, oh, he wrote for SNL. Check. He's Asian. Check.
Real quick. He's Asian. I mean, whatever. Like, what does that even mean? Most of the globe is Asian. You know, it's like, what the? Yeah, it's absurd. Why? Like, what does that even mean? That, oh, we need an Asian guy. He's not Asian. He's Nimesh Patel. He's a guy. You know, it's absurd.
Well, if you have that sort of, you have just marginalized him by taking away the crux of his identity, according to some leftist, right? And that's inherently the dangerous thing about doing that. And I think this is why I was taught racism was a problem. It's because you make mistakes when you judge people strictly off of how they look or their heritage, right? You make mistakes and you miss opportunities and you fall short of what it is you're trying to do if you start judging people like that. And clearly the Asian American Alliance at Columbia just wanted an Asian person. That's all that they cared about. The fact that they let's find us the best Asian comic we can find. There's a writer from SNL who's willing to perform here. And when that guy is, kind of wagging his finger at you going like, hey, when you guys get to the real world, you're going to encounter a lot more rough material than this at the water cooler, let alone in the writer's room. You know what I mean? So, you might want to brace yourselves. Clearly, I think this was a political crowd. This isn't a comedy crowd. And they're probably like most politically active college students, just waiting to sink their teeth into something. And I think they saw him as red meat the second he opened his mouth.
Well, I'd like to ask Nimesh Patel how he prefers to identify, as Nimesh Patel, former writer for Saturday Night Live, one of the most elite comedy programs of all time, or Nimesh Patel, Asian guy. I'd like to know. I'd like to.
That's. What would you like your obituary to read?
Dan Bennett.
Nimesh Patel.
Yeah, Dan Bennett. White, kind of weird, whitish, I guess. I don't even know. I don't know even what white means. Like, I don't know. I mean, do I even look? Do you look at that guy and think, oh, that's an Asian guy? I don't at all.
That's the problem. But that's because we've been. Again, I speak in the voice of those who espouse this, intersectional nonsense.
so deep within us. That's the problem. So
yeah, it's so, and we have such an inherent bias, and a lot of it stems from the fact that we've lived such a privileged life that we can afford not to see color. You know, of course you don't see people that, but you know what? Even if you say that, you really do see them that way. It's like, I love when people tell me how I view the world. And it's like, no, I think as a kid, they made it pretty damn clear that I shouldn't be judging people like that. You know, I always say this, I couldn't imagine trying to make friends with my Black friends from high school. I couldn't imagine trying to approach them in a social situation at like 16, 17, 18 now, you know what I mean? Or as opposed to now, because I have to do this whole song and dance as a white person. Like, look, I know things are different between us, but blah, blah, blah. I didn't have to do any of that in high school. I would just crack a joke from South Park or Dave Chappelle, and me and my friends were just laughing together. And that's all that mattered, because we found ourselves, we identified as the kids who weren't especially popular, but were kind, and more importantly, funny. Like, we had a fun time together. Our lunch table was the rowdiest because we would laugh the hardest. And that's how we identified. It had nothing to do with, you know, it's sad that kids are being told that this is the crux of your identity is your race, because there are racist people out there who refuse to see the good things in you, because that small population truly does exist. They have changed that now to mean, well, if we're going to survive, then all of us have to approach the world with this lens now. And I think that's such a mistake. You know, it's like we're capitulating to such a small minority of people that are in fact racist, but we overcome that by saying that that's a stupid way of looking the world, and it is.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, and I don't quite love the language of this because I consider myself a liberal for the most part. But you know, here in this article, they talk about this recent Yale study that found that like white liberals tend to present themselves as less competent when speaking to minorities, whatever that means exactly, whereas conservatives don't. Where point being, like, it's white liberals feel the need to condescend when they speak to minority people, and conservatives tend to just talk to them the way they talk to anyone else.
Interesting. I mean, I think, what do you think, Dan, that kind of boils down to the idea of most conservatives? I'll say most because we can't be, you know, hashtag not all, right? But most conservatives who identify with the philosophy of individualism, like treat me as a person, let me live my life, leave me alone, let me do my thing the way I want to do it, no government interference, no government intervention, let me do me the way I want to do it. Because of that, do you think that fosters a mindset of I will treat others in the same way, the golden rule, because that's the kind of society I want to perpetuate, and when I encounter someone, I will treat them as a person, as an individual?
Yeah, I think so. Although I think it's less that like the conservative mindset is so specifically one way, more that the like white liberal progressive mindset is just so backwards and absurd these days. Like where I guess intersectionality has kind of forced people to put everyone else in these boxes and be hypersensitive about what they say when, and it just causes people to treat everyone with kid gloves. And I mean, I think it quite clearly hinders conversation. It hinders relationships. So I think it's less about a conservative mindset, you know, less about the positive attributes of a conservative mindset, more about the real negatives of the modern progressive mindset, which I think is a big problem.
I agree with that. You know, I like you had mentioned, they tend to put people in boxes, and I think that's because that's their political philosophy. Like, I want to be identified as a part of a group before I'm identified as, you know, myself, whatever that is, right? My identity is so important because of the social ramifications from how people observe me in the world, and that stems from the fact that racism is real. So I have to recognize that because racism is real, if I think in group dynamics, I know certain white people will give me, a white person, the upper hand just because of my race, and I know that certain white people view minorities as lesser than them simply because of their race, which means in order to combat that, I have to start treating people by the basis of the group they belong to before I get to know them as an individual, which leads you to talking down to people, whether you know it or not. Like that article had mentioned. I think it forces you to talk in a way that, you know, kind of smears the individual in front of you. It's like, look, that's like you said, I'm Patal the comedian. I'm not Patal the Asian first, you know, like.
Yeah, not just the comedian, the hyper successful comedian, where 99% of comedians are not at all successful. He actually accomplished something, and we're going to talk about his race. Like, good heavens, the guy got to write on SNL. Just grow up. It isn't about you. It's not about the billions of other Asian people that never wrote for SNL. It's about Nimesh Patel, a guy who kicked butt and got stuff done. I'm watching my language apparently, and achieve something. You know, like that's what really drives me crazy about this stuff, is that it debases, it devalues rather the accomplishments of individual people. Like, hooray, Asians on SNL. Like, Asians aren't on SNL. Nimesh Patel is on SNL. You know,
well said. Well said.
Like, hooray, Dan Aykroyd is on SNL. His name is Dan and he's white. I don't care. I'm happy for him. I don't feel like I achieved anything, you know. I didn't.
Hey, you live and die by the success of your race. It's such a sad way of.
Hey, remember, white guys, remember when we made that Bassomatic sketch? That was great for us, the white guys. Remember when we did, you know, Wild and Crazy Guys? No, I didn't do that. I'm not part of a group that did that. That was Dan Aykroyd, Steve Martin, two specific individuals.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine popping in the DVD, if you still do that, right? Popping in the DVD of like classic SNL from the 70s and watching the Wild and Crazy Guys sketch and looking over at your friend or significant other and be like, you know, as white people, I'm pretty proud of that one. It's like, what are you talking about?
Weren't we so funny in that sketch, guys? That one that we all did together where we blended a fish? It's like, no.
Although I will say there are times where there's a fish in a blender and I go, it's such a white person sketch. I can't get rid of that. Like, there's no way I could shake that. That's definitely a white dude definitely probably wrote that.
Well, these days, PETA would be all over that sketch. So.
Oh my goodness! Aren't fish brain dead?
Yeah, but so is PETA. So I don't know. So
and I'm a dog, and I agree with that. So I mean, what does that say?
No. I don't know what anything says.
They kill thousands of us every year and just put us in dumpsters.
Us what? Wait, what? PETA?
You didn't hear about that? That came out a couple years ago.
That they do. Oh, wait, that they do what?
There's just like mass killings of my people that be dog people, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Right. You're good boys. I'm sorry, man. That's tragic. I hate that. I honestly, it's hard for me to talk about that stuff because it's really hard for me to think about dogs that are hurt. But,
I get it. Me too. Yeah. Me too. I mean,
you too. Yeah. Sure. Well, we talked.
I've been around a while, Dan. I've been around a while, you know. So that's like
in human years too, or
8 human years I've been around. So I've seen a thing or two. Okay.
All
right. I'm not a spring chicken, and let me tell you something. I got my eye on PETA. Right? They say they're out there to help us, but I don't know. I'm more cautious than some other young pups out there. Okay.
Okay, fair enough. I gotcha. I appreciate that. And, I appreciate you keep an eye out for the animal obsessives.
Yeah. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for hearing me on that.
You got it, buddy. And that's on you, not other dogs. But
absolutely. I never claim to speak for all dogs, well, except for pit bulls. I will speak on behalf of pit bulls. I'm curious about them too. Okay. They make me nervous. They usually come from a bad neighborhood.
Isn't it kind of amazing what constitutes a dog? Like dogs, a dog is like a thing that is, giant, like 5 foot tall. And a dog is also something that's like 8 inches tall in some cases. It's not like that with elephants, like an elephant is an elephant, but a dog can be like hairless, hair full, long ears, short ears, snout.
Okay, Dan. Dan. I'm just gonna say, dog to human here.
Yeah.
Talk about calling the kettle black. Okay. You guys look completely different. Yeah. I mean, there's some, I'm your best friend here in the US. I gotta be careful what neighborhoods I go to when I'm overseas. I do a little bit of traveling, a little bit of business over in Asia.
Oh, right? Boy.
There's straight up festivals where they're digging into my cousins over there. Okay, so I got to be careful.
Culture Shock is not going to be happy about this one. But
no, Culture Shock isn't happy about most things though. So that's a real situation.
They're not happy people.
Okay,
but
what else we got on the list here?
Well, we did talk about we talked about talking about Bitcoin a bit, which I don't know how much there is to say anymore. Bitcoin is doing horribly. I mean, we do fancy ourselves some sort of a libertarian leaning podcast, so I wanted to bring it up, but good heavens, it's not a lot of fun. I was way up last year, like everyone who's invested in Bitcoin, and now it's brutal. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that the amount I had in wasn't like life-changing one way or the other. The only way it was going to change my life is if that McAfee dude was right and it went up to 1 million. Then I would have been great, but whatever. Worst case scenario, I lose a couple grand or something. But man, if it really tanks, if it just tanks for good, like that's very tragic though, because I do think cryptocurrency still has a lot of potential. It's really remarkable to see what's going on here. I remember this time last year, I was thinking, oh, hey, I fact them, whatever they're doing something right. But I remember this time last year, I was thinking, hey, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to diversify, get into a lot of different coins, not just Bitcoin. I'll get some Ripple, I'll get some Ether, I'll get some Stellar Lumens, I'll get some Litecoin, I'll get some Tron. And then, no matter what, I'll be in good shape.
Oh, man.
So, cut two.
We all had the same plan. And then right before the holiday, right? Oh my God, that crash hurt so bad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Thank God. I had the ripcord there, and as soon as I was about to break even on the crash, I pulled it. Wow. And I just saved my investment essentially.
Wow.
So I still have, I broke even, and I still have a little floating around in there because hopefully it just jumps back up one day. Mm-hmm. Just hold, people, and maybe in 5 years we'll be singing a different tune. Yeah. I just think that there's just so many people involved in the market, so many people that love and believe in this thing, mm-hmm. that someone's going to figure something out. There's enough people that are playing with these ideas to kind of make it what it could be. I really think there's way too many nerds in basements nowadays. You know, we talk about kids not getting out anymore. You know what? Maybe good. Okay, maybe some of them will figure this out. You know, sure, depression is at an all-time high. Suicide rates are skyrocketing. But if we could figure out this crypto thing, I think overall it might be better for society. I don't know.
Gosh, I hope so. I think so too. I mean, honestly, I'm pretty optimistic overall. I was able to save a good chunk of my investment, but I bought back in June a little bit more when it was hovering near 10 grand, and that should not prove to be wise. So I don't know. I'm just I do, like, honestly, I do have faith. I have faith in crypto. I don't know if I have faith in any of these companies. I mean, they're starting to shutter. It just looked so wildly promising a year ago, and it just looked like there was so much ahead. And it's certainly a wake up call to just at how challenging it is to get anything off the ground. That all these companies, who are no doubt staffed with brilliant people without question, you know, I mean, some really bright guys all around the world, and yet, you know, if your name isn't Loopring, then you have a horrible day. Your name is IO.
Oh my God.
I mean, Ardor. At least
Ardor is barely staying alive, baby. That's still.
I don't know. It's not good. So I don't know. That's what I wanted to say. At least we brought up the Bitcoin, the idea that it exists, that it's out there, and that I still support it. In fact, I I wouldn't put it past myself to buy in the near-ish future if things don't.
I think you'd be surprised to see where this is at in 2 years. And if you're saying, what do you mean surprised, like it's non-existent, or surprised as in it's 15K again? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you because honestly, I have no clue. I could see both of those. You know what? I'm not going to live to see the benefits of this. You know, who am I kidding, right? So
you're working on Doug. So
I know it's a real problem. You gotta make use of life as best you can. Simple pleasures, you know, sniffing butts and chewing toys, right? So
I envy you there. I envy you there, buddy. Well, right. Any concluding thoughts? I think we should probably wrap things up.
Yeah, I think everyone should really keep an eye on what's going on in France. I think it's a watershed moment in Europe and the instability of the continent in a time and place that we haven't seen probably since the late 1800s. And I would also say that as a people that perform and write comedy, yourself and myself included, the trend of social justice being pushed through comedy, specifically in alt rooms. You know, it's really sad. You know, I think a lot of clubs are still very successful and people are very free to express themselves how they see fit. I think that bit would have worked not only just fine in a club, I think it may have done poorly because it wasn't edgy enough. You know what I mean? And I think in alt rooms that probably yourself and myself are more familiar with, I think what you're seeing is people who are social justice, identify as social justice warriors first before they probably identify as a comic. And they use this as a medium rather than as the purpose of why they do what they do. This art form, comedy, is a tool, a device only for these people. Who support this social justice comedy. But strictly comics, you know, guys like Patal who identifies as a liberal and as a leftist himself, you're going to get into hot water more and more as you try and explore, ideas and use your thoughts freely, because there's people that more and more people in in that specific comedy scene, the alt scene, that have no appetite for it. They want this to be a kumbaya session or a social justice roundtable rather than a comedy show.
Mm-hmm. And I would say I understand that it's near impossible to do so, but I encourage anyone in Hollywood, in comedy, in the arts, if you identify as a leftist, stop doing it. The left does not want you. They're not helping you. They're not helping anyone right now. I'm not saying to join the right if you don't want to, but definitely don't be a leftist. They stink. They're not doing anything good. All they're doing is making things worse in literally every industry right now. Just stifling creativity, stifling independent thought, stifling individuality, and it's got to stop. And people have got to start speaking out and standing up and saying, no, it's not okay. It's not okay. So that's where I'm at, and I'm not apologizing for it anymore. It's just ridiculous, and it's dangerous, and it's a problem. So that's what I'll say. There's a lot of funny people, and they've got to stop. They've got to put their foot down and not give an inch anymore, because it's wrong. So that's all.
Fair enough, Dan. Sounds good to me.
Thank you, good boy. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night and a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah. It is Hanukkah right now, so have a
happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Very happy Hanukkah, and take it easy. Stay warm.